within their jurisdiction. The lands of the Lummi Nation, the Makah, the Quileute tribes have also been impacted. The good news is the water has crested. Crews have been working nonstop during the daylight hours to remove debris. And I want to thank our crews who are out there working so hard in the mud. Several closures remain. The State Department of Transportation is prioritizing critical east-west links, of course. They're moving crews and equipment from other areas to that region to help with the removal of debris. Our Washington State Conservation Corps deployed to Skagit County for sandbagging early in the floods, and they remain ready along with the National Guard for debris removal and other tasks as requested by the cities and counties. The Washington Military Department, in connection with other state agencies like the Department of Health and Department of Commerce, have been doing tremendous work delivering needed supplies, fuel to the Makahs, other material to Lummis, and other isolated communities. We thank them for their efforts. Now we're moving to the recovery aspect of this mission, and we are doing preliminary damage assessments to get a full picture of the impacts and the costs of the storm and flood damage. We don't know yet whether that damage will rise to the threshold that will be needed to obtain federal assistance, but we obviously will be very aggressive in pressing our case should we believe we're entitled to that. That's why it's very important for people to keep records of the costs you're incurring for damages or the assessments of your damages in your home or businesses, and provide that information to cities. The cities are being very creative in doing this assessment. They've actually had educators out knocking door to door to help compile this information. It's very important in regard to our ability to obtain federal assistance. This morning I spoke with FEMA Administrator Deanna Criswell about that assessment process and the potential for a presidential disaster declaration and the strong consideration we'll need for the individual assistance that we hope to qualify for the federal government if we get the right numbers coming back. We also spoke about finding creative solutions to the housing crisis that families are going to find themselves in. One of the difficulties in Whatcom County is just a lack of housing, period. We're going to have some, I believe, some cash assistance I hope to get shortly up to these families, but even that doesn't solve the problem. We have to actually find housing. So we are investigating now potential short-term shelter and housing options, and our emergency services department is looking at it as we speak. These areas are, some of them are geographically isolated, obviously makes this a much more difficult process. We obviously, if people want to help these families, there is a nonprofit set up on that, and obviously we encourage contributions for people who want to help these families. Now, while we focus on recovery, I think it's important to take a stock of what has happened to us in Washington, and it has been dire this last year. We've had a heat dome that has taken the lives of Washingtonians just because of excessive heat. We've had a drought that has reduced our agricultural production. We've had forest fires now that burned hundreds of thousands of acres and created conditions of smoke that was so bad that air in the Methow Valley was the most dangerous air anywhere in the planet for a while last summer. And now we have these very severe floods that are unprecedented. In some places that we've never seen floods like this in Whatcom County. All these natural disasters spell one thing, and that is the footprint of climate change, which is attacking our state. It's important to realize that for two reasons. One, we're going to have to all work together to make our communities more resilient, to find ways to have our roads that won't be washed out with the increasing level and intensity of floods, to look for ways to help our water supply system, to look for ways to protect our utilities and our sewer and water systems from these floods, to make our systems more resilient. But that is not all we have to do. We have to attack this problem at its source, and its source is carbon pollution. And that's why we all have to buckle down and take some additional steps to fight against that pollution that is causing climate change. We've had some success in Washington State, but we need to have more. The state yet is not meeting its goals for carbon reduction, and I will be asking the legislature this January to take further steps in this existential crisis, against this existential crisis that is so upon us. And here's what I've learned as governor of the state of Washington. In Washington State, you can run, but you can't hide from climate change. It's going to hit you in Walla Walla, in the Methow Valley, in Forks, in Sumas. It's everywhere. And that's why I'm going to look forward to the legislature taking strong action this year to continue this effort. Unfortunately, not everyone's got the memo. There are some folks still fighting against our action against climate change, including Tim Eyman, who filed a very questionable lawsuit against our Climate Commitment Act yesterday. I believe trying to go backwards is a direction Washington State should not go in anything, and certainly against this mortal threat to the health and well-being of the state of Washington. So we're going to ask people all join together to go forward, not backwards, when it comes to climate change. Before I take your questions, I just want quick notes about our efforts in Glasgow at the COP26. We had a good story to tell from Washington State, and I was able to lead a group of 68 states and regional governments in a consortium that put forth assurances that we would adopt a range of emission slashing actions to be accomplished by 2030 and beyond. This includes my executive order on getting to zero emission public fleets in the near future. Now, these jurisdictions, I led an effort that got 68 states and provinces together on this. These jurisdictions are quite a force taken together. They represented 470 million people. If this group was a country, it would be the third largest country in the world. The UN calls us subnationals. We actually called ourselves supranationals, and I think that's actually an apt title because we're able to go faster than the national governments. Washington State is able to go faster than the federal government, and we're seeing that across the world. So these local governments really have a critical role to play, in part because the nation states aren't going fast enough, and in part because we realize that we can grow jobs in our community, as we're doing in our state, in so many different industries, including new batteries, electric buses, the world's first all-electric airplane up in Arlington. We're building our economies big time, and these 68 governors understood that. So that was a good meeting. I was also able to meet with a number of folks on our bilateral relationships. I think that this is going to help us grow our efforts. I met with the Environmental Minister of Quebec. We discussed the potential of joining efforts on our Climate Commitment Act and our Cap and Invest bill. Met with a number of leaders from Korea, Catalonia, United Kingdom. Good discussion with the First Minister of Scotland, a delightful leader. So it was a good meeting because we were able to raise the ambitions of people, but also join with like-minded governors from around the world. And we had a good story to tell in Washington State. I also note, too, that this was hosted by the Climate Registry. It's a nonprofit, and they did this while being carbon neutral. They had offsets that they took care of. So at COP, the world did not get all the commitments that we needed, but there was progress, and I'm glad Washington has a good story to tell and more good work to do, both. On the pandemic front, we obviously would like to be optimistic. In the last month, we've had a downward trend, but this thing can continue to spring back at us because we have a very high rate of transmission. The rate of transition, even though it's come down significantly, still remains very high. It remains dramatically higher than it was in the second wave. And so we have to realize that we are not out of the woods in this pandemic. Some other places in the country are seeing actual increases. We've seen a slowing down of the rate of decrease in our cases. We've had now over 9,000 deaths in the state of Washington. Think about that. 9,000 people have lost their lives. And I really hope that people think about that when they think about whether to get a vaccine or not. Because this is a life-saving vaccine, we're still encouraging people to get it. We're pleased that 10 million doses of the COVID vaccine have been administered. The pediatric vaccine is now available, and already about 60,000 of our most precious assets, our kids between 5 and 11, have got the vaccine. But now we have boosters. We've had a good uptake of boosters, and we believe that boosters will be available just in the next couple of days to everyone who would otherwise qualify, not just dependent on age. We encourage people in that direction. Boosters are important. They mean the vaccine works, because the booster has been shown to increase the antibody activity once that booster gets installed. So we hope people will continue to use the booster. So as we go into Thanksgiving, I'll just mention a couple things I hope we can be thankful for. One, we can be thankful that 5 million Washingtonians are protecting not only themselves, but they're protecting their families and their co-workers and their community. Because those 5 million Washingtonians all have stepped up to the plate to do something that's good for their community, which is to make it safer, because everybody who gets vaccinated is less likely to transmit this virus. So big thanks to the 5 million Washingtonians that have really shown they're a proud part of the Washington family. But we also want to thank the brilliant people who have given us these life-saving medicines. These things are blessings, and I think we can be thankful for them. A comment on the Osha rule the Biden administration has put forward. As you know, this requires a vaccine or testing for companies with over 100 employees. The requirement is now undergoing judicial review, and enforcement is pending further judicial decisions. I believe the standard is the right direction for the nation, but obviously we have to wait for judicial decisions. I know this has caused a little consternation for folks to know exactly what the near future is, but I hope that we will have judicial review and decisions in the near future. We'll be watching those decisions closely. I do want to make clear for folks that at this time, our intention is to retain OSHA's 100 employee threshold and also the option for testing out in lieu of vaccination. So that's the decision we made at this time, except where changes are necessary to align with our state law. So I do believe these new standards are coming, and I hope people think about how to implement them ultimately. Obviously, we're watching the trajectory of this virus. We could have to take more aggressive action if necessary, but right now that's the policy that we have adopted. I have today General Dougherty, National Guard, and Nick Struley and Dr. Shaw for comments. And I don't know if Dr. Shaw, I don't think he's here today. Is Dr. Shaw going to make some comments? Is that the plan? Okay, Dr. Shaw, you'll stand by for Q&A. And with that, great, thank you. You may fire when ready. Gridley.
Governor, given that a vast majority of people in the state have received at least one shot and more than 820,000 people have received boosters, what metrics are you looking at beyond the vaccination rate that determine when emergency declarations will no longer be necessary in the state?
Well, they're the same metrics that we've used when we opened up our economy. They're the same metrics we used when we opened our restaurants. They're the same metrics that we've used when we've opened our schools successfully, which we're really happy about. They're the same metrics that we've used when we've opened our sporting events and concerts. It's the same things, and that's a whole host of metrics that go into the fundamental question is, when can we have a situation where we're confident that this pandemic will not spring back on us and overload our medical care delivery system, which is still extremely stressed. So those are, just to name some of them, the epidemiological curve, what the percentage of Washingtonians that are infected, how fast the infection rate is going, what the hospitalization rate is, what the uses of intensive care units are, what the delta is between different areas in the state and which groups are being affected, what the uptake level is for the vaccination of our people, the progress of any remedial medicine, and there is some hope that we will have a pill form antiviral that will help reduce hospitalizations and death, but that certainly does not remove in any way, shape, or form the advisability of getting a vaccine right now, because that's not going to eliminate hospital and death. So all of those things would go into a decision of when it makes sense for the state to continue on the track which we've been on, which is to remove some of these requirements, as we've done over the last several months. And I can't tell you when that will be, but I hope it's sooner rather than later. I will tell you this, the one thing I do know, every time somebody gets vaccinated, that day gets closer. And if you want these things to go back to normal, getting a vaccine is the best thing any of us can do, and I hope people do that.
But the rate is already far ahead of that initial goal of 70% that was set. We're at 80+%. And I think it's clear that COVID's going to be with us for a while, even with high vaccination rates. So can you talk a bit more specifically about how the state evolves to deal with something that might be with us long term, and how to be able to continue to increase the vaccination rate and lower cases, but without the necessity for the emergency powers?
Well, if the emergency powers continue to get to a position where the infection rate is low enough so we don't have to have any public policy affecting it, we need several things. We need a higher vaccination rate. It would be useful to have the success of a pill-based antiviral to reduce the hospitalization and consequent death rate. A stable medical delivery system that shows its stability. Those things, as they come online, when those things get to a certain point to remove policy actions, that's when we'll know we can remove emergency declarations and state policies. And as I've indicated, the way to get to that point is to increase vaccinations. Now, I'm hopeful we can get to that point. It's unlikely to eliminate the virus from the globe. That's very unlikely. But there is a substantial probability, in my view, that we can get to a place where the vaccination rate is high enough that it reduces the transmission rate low enough where this will no longer threaten our healthcare delivery system from being overwhelmed. And that's our goal.
But the transmission rate, some public health officials are saying is really not the best metric anymore. To Rachel's point about this becoming something we're going to have to live with. I think about half of states are no longer in a state of emergency, give or take. I think only 10 states have mask mandates. And I think there's probably 5 million Washingtonians out there wondering, well, what's the reward I get for getting vaccinated, and what is that threshold? Do we need to get to 90, 95%? When can I take off the mask? When do I get my reward?
As I've indicated, we get our reward when you don't get sick tomorrow and die and have a loved one die. That's a pretty good reward. I'm not sure I'm understanding your question to suggest that saving your life is not a reward. I think it's a pretty doggone good reward, and that's what a vaccine does. It makes sure your spouse comes home and doesn't die. That's a heck of a good reward in my book, so I'm not sure I understand your question. A secondary reward is that you have the assurance that you are not, or the likelihood that you're reducing the risk that if you get the virus, you will not infect someone else. Now, virtually everybody I know doesn't want to infect somebody else. That is a reward, to know the comfort that you're reducing the risk that you become a vector. That's a reward. Those are two pretty big rewards. Third, when you get the vaccine, you hasten the day when we can remove any of these restrictions, including mask mandates. So those who are uncomfortable with masks, the best way to hasten the day when we can remove them is to get the vaccine. Now, other states have taken other courses. I recognize that. We call those second-class states because Washington State's a first-class state. We're a state that believes we ought to save lives, and we're saving lives. Our fatality rate, some of these other states that are going the course that you've suggested, they've had fatality rates 2 and 3 times higher than ours. 2 or 3 times more people have died because they didn't take the precautions that we have. And many states are now seeing a resurgence of the virus. I think there's 20 or 22 states that are now seeing their numbers go up again. And obviously, we're concerned about that as we go inside for winter. And last year, when we went inside, we had a resurgence. So I do believe the things we're doing make sense. They're having some success. Our vaccine mandate significantly increased our vaccination rate of our state employees and our healthcare and our educators. And schools are open, states open. These things, I think, are having a beneficial impact. By the way, I made a crack about second-class states. I retract that. I don't mean any state is a second-class state. But I do believe that what we're doing is a successful effort to save Washingtonians' lives. Yeah.
Hey, Governor.
Hold on a second if you may. Dr. Shaw wanted to add something.
Yeah, Governor, just a couple of things that I wanted to mention. One is, as to your last point, the national death rate is nearly twice that of the state of Washington. I think that's really important to let people know. And the other is that our ICU occupancy